Hello and welcome to another How to Succeed podcast. I'm your host, Mike Montague, Director of Community Engagement at Sandler. And my guest this week is Ken Guest, a Sandler trainer from Akron, Ohio. And we're talking about how to succeed at pipeline management. The podcast is brought to you by Sandler, the worldwide leader in sales management and customer service training with over 200 locations. For more information, go to sandler.com. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you are listening or watching to it right now. All right. This is How to Succeed at Pipeline Management with Ken Guest. Ken, let's start here and talk about the definition of pipeline, what should be in it, and why and how we can manage this thing.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on again, Mike. It's been a while, but good to see you. Clients are always asking for like best practices around managing a pipeline, what should and shouldn't be in a pipeline. Here's been my mindset for a long time now. I don't think anything should go into a pipeline per se of deals I'm working on until I get a first agreed upon meeting on the calendar. Once that's on the calendar, now I look at that as being in the pipeline, because I always look at a big difference between prospecting and selling. So prospecting is all the behaviors that you do, calls you make, emails you send, all that stuff to get an opportunity to get in front of somebody to sell them something. So if I do all those behaviors and then I get that opportunity, to meet with somebody and it's scheduled, I think right then when it's scheduled, it should go in the pipeline. And one of the reasons I'm a big fan of that is from a sales leadership standpoint. If I'm managing somebody's pipeline per se, or looking at my team members' pipeline, that gives me the opportunity to say, oh, hey, Mike, I see you got an appointment with Dave next week. Why don't we pre-brief that thing? If I don't know about it till after the meeting's already happened, it's too late it's a missed opportunity for coaching. So,
I think that's a great point. When you get them on there too early, people start asking you about it, and you're no, I'm just pursuing this one. There's nothing here yet. I think the other end of that question is also interesting, which is when do you take stuff out of the pipeline? Yeah. Because we all have that stuffed 90-day plus category where they haven't been won or lost and there's been no activity for a quarter. It's not a great place to be as a salesperson. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I look at it like everything should stay in the pipeline until you get a decision. And my colleague Jordan Mullet on our team, he likes to refer to everybody having a clean pipeline. And his definition of clean pipeline is no fluff, no garbage, no stuff that, your brain has already told you it's a no, but your heart won't get there. So you keep it in there because you think I still got a chance, kind of the Jim Carrey line, there's still a chance. Yeah. But those are the ones that we need to have the courage to just, help the prospect tell us no so we can get it out of there and move on. So I think that's kind of the full spectrum beginning to end of pipeline.
And let's start with the attitude of the sales manager here a little bit. You shared a great one there, which is it should be a clean pipeline. This should be our most accurate forecast possible. That means no skinny pipelines, no sandbagging for next quarter to make yourself look good. It also means no bloated pipelines and a lot of hoping and wishing and praying that the deals come through this quarter. I feel like that's a lot easier said than done. Where do you feel like most sales managers or salespeople mess this up?
Well, I think whenever it's left for interpretation by either the salesperson or sales manager, whether that should or should not be, if it's in question, it's probably not a good thing. And there shouldn't be any gray area, so to speak. And this sales leaders came to me. I had one in particular come to me about 3 years ago and say, hey, give me some way to benchmark my pipeline for my team. So I kind of created this concept I called the 5 lenses of pipeline management. And so there's these 5 different ways that I feel like we can look at our pipeline, or our team can look at their own pipeline, and through the eyes of those 5 lenses really help us decide what we should and shouldn't do with that opportunity. So I start that with the sales leaders and teach them, every deal you're looking at with your team, look at through all 5 lenses. And then I tell the salespeople the same thing, and it really eliminates that gray area.
Well, we're going to jump into those here just in a second, and we may mess up our order here a little bit with attitude, behavior, and technique today. I don't know which bucket to put lenses into, but what I love about it is that I always have this thing about how do we see the world? Can we see these deals and this pipeline accurately? And if we only look through our own eyes as a salesperson, the answer is no. We get happy ears, or we read too much into what somebody said. And if we only look at it from the manager's perspective, if they're not listening to call recordings and diving deep on this, they're probably only taking the salesperson's word for it, which is like doubling down on the copy of the bad information. And we need these outside perspectives. We need a Sandler coach maybe saying, ooh, what's the realistic, opportunity here in this deal based on what we've learned at it. At Sandler, we have new stuff like Deal IQ, or we take 7 different categories and look at deals. We can also look at the buyer's perspective. What have they done that's a measurable action that we can say, oh, yeah, they reached out to us. They set that meeting. That means it can go into a prospect phase for us. So I jumped ahead, and I may have stolen those lenses. But I think the more lenses we put on there, the more accurate, kind of the 360 view we get of this opportunity. So let's jump into it and hear what yours are.
Yeah, so the overall attitude I think salespeople and sales managers need to have when it comes to pipeline management is the attitude that when somebody asks me to propose a solution, I don't necessarily look at that as a positive. It's time to put my critical thinking hat on and say, okay, what questions do I need to know the answer to? Did I do a good job of explaining my solution and things like that, where there's really truly a reason to buy from me? And when we don't do that, salespeople tend to get a little bit of happy ears, we like to say, when they get proposals in front of them. Oh, great, I get to quote something, but they didn't do a good job before that. And so as I go into kind of the first lens that I tell everybody to look at is when I'm proposing a solution or whatever stage I'm in, I need to ask myself, what is the client's pain? And that's a simple Sandler term, but I have a unique definition of the way I look at pain. And I tell people you have to view it as what's the emotional reason that they want to buy from me. And if I don't have an emotional reason they want to buy from me, it's not time to propose my solution. It's time to start asking questions. So if I were to jump ahead to a little bit of how do we do that? I'm sitting at my desk, I've got this proposal in front of me. I ask myself that question, or I put myself through that first lens, and I'm going to guess that half the time, a lot of salespeople don't have a good answer, and so if they don't, it's time to call the buyer up and ask some questions before we quote.
And I think a lot of those reasons come from the salesperson, right? They said, oh, well, they have a pain. They need to buy X, Y, or Z. And then when you say, why are they going to buy it from you? They say whatever the company line is. Oh, well, we're going to be a better value, or we have better customer service, or whatever. But they didn't actually hear the customer say, right, we have better customer service. That's a different standard. I like that one.
Yeah. So the way I view it is if we're being honest with ourselves as salespeople and we have the awareness that we didn't do a good job of explaining differentiators, it's time to do a little bit of what Sandler likes to call negative reverse selling. And I would call you up. Hey, Mike, I've got your proposal in my hand. I got to be honest with you. When we met last week, I think I did a pretty bad job of understanding why you would even want to buy from me, like what value I'm adding versus anybody else or anything like that. And a lot of times when that happens, buyers' decisions ends up coming down to price. And is there a reason that you even saw that you'd want to pick me? And make the buyer sell them. And if there isn't, now at least I'm back into a dialogue. And I think the good news there is if we do it before we propose the solution, a lot of times buyers will take your call. Even if they're just looking at you as like a third bidder, they'll take your call and answer your questions. And it's your opportunity to really distinguish, is there a reason to buy from me or not?
I like that. No pain, no sale is a classic Sandler rule there. What about lens number 2?
So lens number 2 is something, and I don't know if this is necessarily a Sandler thing, but it's something I heard out there that says that there's basically 3 types of proposals that we can get ourselves in. We can get ourselves in what we call an informational proposal. And the definition of informational proposal, the way I see it, is I'm gonna throw a bunch of bids out there and see what the market bears right now. And I had an interesting story from somebody years ago who was a really large digital marketing firm who would sell to Fortune 500 companies. And they said this was a standard practice. They would get a bid package to basically write a complete digital marketing solution from scratch for the client, submit it with their price, and then if they made the top three, then they get to have a conversation and all the hours invested. So that's kind of one of those informational gathering proposals. And the second type of proposal I see a lot of people run into is what I call a leverage proposal. And that's where I think I'm being leveraged, that they're happy with who they're working with, but they're trying to give me good buying signals like they're ready to leave them. And I need to be able to recognize that. And then the third type is confirmation proposal. And that's where you're asking me for the quote because there's a 95% chance we're moving forward. We have history together. And so I think we need to, the lens we need to look at is which one am I in? And then if I'm in, depending on which one I'm in, I have certain questions I need to be asking before I, again, propose my solution.
Yeah, I like that because it's really about our chances of winning here, right? That if it's really informational, we're taking a shot in the dark. If it's comparative, we might, if we come in at a lower price, actually open a door or something. Maybe we got a 50-50 shot. But those one where the confirmation of agreements, we know that like 90+% of deals come down like that. Even if you're in one of those other two buckets, somebody is in the confirmation phase and they're getting additional information from you, or they're getting an additional quote, but they're in that 90% range over there. And we just didn't know that somebody else had that inside track.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I would advise people, I don't want to ever tell somebody don't bid it unless you're in confirmation phase, because I think that's a little hardcore. But if you're in an informational bid, you think you are, at least have the awareness that that's the game I'm in and ask different questions. And, one of the questions you might want to ask your buyer is doing nothing an option? Is this just a market study? Are you just trying to see what the market bears? You may not do anything. And, if I'm in a leverage proposal, again, there's another opportunity for some negative reverse selling where you can call up and I could say, Mike, when we met last week, I appreciated the time, but I got to be honest with you. I think ABC company you've been working with for the last 5 years, they sound like they're doing a pretty good job. I don't really know what value I could add to do it better. Like, why would you leave them? And really test that buyer's resolve to make a change or not. But at least, again, I think a lot of this stuff that I'm talking about today comes down to a level of awareness, and you talked about it earlier. We've got that gray area with pipeline. I think this starts to eliminate some of that gray and at least gives us some of the awareness of, okay, this is the game I'm in. Now I have a decision to make. Do I want to play the game or not?
Yeah, I like that. I want to highlight the one you said that over 50% of B2B deals are lost to no decision, not to competitors. And so when those informational quotes, you got to be really careful, or at least really realistic about putting time and effort into those. What about number 3?
The third lens, my description of it's a little lengthy, but it's similar in the first couple in that I like to say, have I asked every question that ideally I'd like to know the answer to that would help me kind of determine how I quote it or if I quote it. And it really comes down to, I run into this with clients all the time. What's some questions you love to know the answer to when you're quoting a solution? And they always say, what's their budget? Who are the decision makers? Who am I competing against? And I always say, well, why didn't you ask that? Because wouldn't that impact how you quote something? I have a large client that can do what they refer to as spot one-on-one work versus long-term contract, big picture work. And they would get, calls to say, how much is it? Well, the question should be, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about a one-off piece of business? Or are we talking about because that might change how I propose my solution, right? I might be willing to be more aggressive, to offer other incentives, things like that. But I need to know the answer to that. And then there are times that based on their answers to certain questions might make you think does this make sense for me to even bid this? Because maybe it doesn't. And so maybe that's one that I have to respectfully and nurturingly bow out. So, but just to have the mindset of, I'm going to ask everything I need to know. And if they choose to not answer it, then again, I have a choice to make whether I want to continue in the sales process or not.
Love this one. We're really just talking about Sandler's qualification steps there, pain, budget, and decision. And I always think about, like, when do you want to know this information? Before or after you give the proposal? You want to know that their brother-in-law is in the business, or there's additional decision makers you haven't met yet, or their budget is restricted from the CFO, or there's a legal process, or whatever the deal is that you commonly run into. When do you want to know that? Before or after you go to all the work and get your hopes up and put it in the pipeline and forecast it to your boss? It's probably before on most of those questions. So getting those out there are great. Why people won't buy from you is a great question before you do that.
Yeah. I have a client that is a high-end commercial landscaping client, and they're one of the more, their investment is higher. Let's call it that. So typically, and they were consistently losing business. And I said, well, do you have a competitor out there that gives off the aura that they're similar to you in quality, but they're really not, and they're always less expensive? And they go, oh, yeah, there's just one particular company. And I said, well, are you asking who you're competing against? And they said, well, no. And I said, well, why don't you start asking that? And so they actually started asking that. And every time this one particular competitor's name came up, I had them ask a follow-up question to the buyer. I had them say, do you view us as equals? Because if you do, it's probably better for me to respectfully bow out. So there was a subtle little, we're not equals there. And they were actually getting calls back a week or two later to say, come back out, because they did their homework then and realized it wasn't. But that's a question they were afraid to ask before. And to your point, they started doing it before they spent all this time doing a design build landscape plan at no charge for a client, and getting decisions a lot quicker. So we just need to, here was a great example of this third lens of a client that they started developing a list of non-negotiable questions that their salespeople were required to ask before they could start proposing solutions. And I would recommend that to any company in any industry. If there's 2 or 3, like, you've got to ask those. And those can be game changers. And the more you can take it out of the creative side of the salesperson and make it more, you got to ask these 3 questions before we can, propose a solution. It really, again, helps take some of that gray area out of the pipeline.
Love it. 2 more to go. What's number 4?
Number 4 is this an opportunity I ought to think about taking to a no? And it speaks to what you talked about earlier. That fluff of pipeline, that when do we take it to a no? And, I always say, if I've followed up on an opportunity more than once and the buyer hasn't returned my call, probably not getting it. So, but we have to have the technique behind that is we have to have the courage to nurturingly tell the buyer it's okay to let me know that you're not moving forward with us, so we can get that out of our pipeline. But having the discipline of doing that, and that's really hard for salespeople when they'd rather have 50 things listed in there when there's really only 5 that are legitimate. It's difficult for salespeople to commit to do.
The ghost busting is hard for sure. If you've been ghosted, it's tough to come to that. I use the same rule in dating as and in sales. I have a 3 call rule. Mine is 3. If I try 3 or more attempts of different methods and mediums and you have not replied, then I'm just going to go ahead and say it's a no. Move along.
I would agree with that in prospecting too. So we 2 or 3 attempts with prospects. If they don't answer yet, it's probably a no. Let's give them permission to tell us no and move on and revisit it potentially at a later date. But the same thing goes with deals that you quoted and you're waiting on an answer.
Yeah, and I think the key there is that you do want to give some effort. Most salespeople give up after one try, or they don't try different methods. So if you keep leaving voicemails and they're not checking their voicemail, stop doing that. Like, try email or text message or something, and just say, hey, where to go, and make sure you hear the answer back, and give them permission to say no too. When you said take it to a no, I think a lot of times you can just say, hey, it's okay. If this is on next year's
Yeah.
budget, if I lost it, I'm a professional. It happens all the time. I'd rather just like to hear that than keep bothering you and be a pest. So
Yeah, exactly. Why prolong it? And as long as you as long as you protect what we call protect their okayness, make it okay for them to say no, and then you don't start begging for the business and telling them why didn't you go with us? Then you put yourself in a position that they'll take your call at a future date, for another opportunity too.
yeah, that's where I was going to go next too, is I think usually no's are only for about 90 days or so, right? The
Yeah.
prospect's world changes every 90 days and the competitor messed up a deal or their budget shifted or their needs shifted or that person left for another job and now there's a new person making the decision. There's a lot of things that can happen. We know that in sales, no's are okay. You can take it out of the pipeline and you can always put it back in 90 days later if they return your call and set another meeting, right?
Yeah, it's that unfounded fear salespeople have. If I allow them to tell me no, they'll never be able. I'll never go to work with them again. Well, the reality is, if their other provider blows up 2 days from now, they might be calling you. You happily take their business. So we just have to have a different mindset around that one.
Close the deal, but keep the door open.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure. Now, number 5.
Number 5 is, what is my clear future? And the Sandler term for that, or my definition of clear future, I should say, is we have to have a date and time agreed upon with the client that they will take our call, our Zoom, whatever, and they will give us a decision or they will agree to a next step. And if they don't, then we have to use the technique of saying, hey, Mike, a lot of times when people aren't even willing to give me a little bit of time on the calendar and I told them that no's okay, I get the feeling I know where things are. And maybe you're just being too kind to tell me that, and we've got to push that to a no and get it out of our pipeline. So my belief system is, as long as somebody's willing to give you a next step on the calendar, and you feel like the reasons are legitimate for why it's continuing down the process and not closing one way or the other, it's legitimate. Stick with it. So, but we should, as a sales manager, maybe an attitude for a sales manager with this whole exercise of these lenses is, tell your salespeople the goal is 100% clear futures on every deal in your pipeline, and the ones you can't get clear futures, get them out, and tell them that no's okay.
I think that's fair, and for me, it comes down to, like you said, defining those non-negotiable questions. Is also, hopefully you've defined your sales process at this point and you know what the next step is and the buyer knows what the next step is. And if you can both mutually agree to that, it's fine. If it takes 8-12 meetings in a year for you to close an enterprise piece of business, that's fine, as long as they keep setting those next meetings and you got something on the calendar. And once it goes to, I don't know, check me after the holidays. Oh, not that holiday, the next holidays.
Yeah.
Then you're in trouble, right?
No question. I remember when COVID hit, there were not a lot of people wanting to buy sales training. Trust me. But people would have conversations with you, because everybody was at home, and I'd had prospects at different stages of my pipeline. And I always said to them, I would say something to the effect of, Mike, I'm sure you can't even wrap your head around a discussion around sales training right now in March of 2020. And they said, Ken, I don't even know if I'm going to have a company in 60 days, and I actually had one guy say, I don't know if I'll be alive in 3 months, and so there was so much fear. And I said, well, I completely understand, but when could you see yourself having the conversation? And for whatever reason, the universal answer was like Q4. So I said, why don't we put a placeholder on each other's calendar and let's just revisit it in October, and you won't hear from me until then. And sure enough, they all did. And we had a lot of meaningful conversations and ended up doing a lot of business with those people. But you have to have the discipline to look for that next step.
I like that too. I feel like you can always cancel appointments and stuff. And so, hey, if we set this for October and we get to October and you go, oh my gosh, isn't it like, I'm an adult. You just email me and say, hey, Mike, that's not going to work. I planned a family vacation for 6 months from now. Or whatever. Like those are easy. We all do that. We all set dentist appointments, 6 months in advance and stuff. And all that's fine. We can take it off the calendar too, but I want to know the reason if we're going to do that. And it's okay to put those placeholders pretty far out. I think it's good. It sets the expectation you're still going to be in business 6 months from now, and you're still going to be looking to help them and around. So I like that one a lot. Final thoughts here. And I think I want to ask about techniques for sales managers inspecting these pipelines, because I think sales manager, the worst question is, have you sold anything today? You know, or what'd you do? Or how'd the meeting go? Those are all kind of bad open questions that every sales manager asks. What are some better ways we can do to inspect these, get real data, and also help them move these sales forward? So the whole point of this is to create accurate forecasts for the company and delivery, and make sure we need to staff up or down if we need to, and have accurate forecasts, but also help the salespeople move more stuff through the pipeline and win more.
Yeah, I think from a technique standpoint, from leadership, if you take these 5 lenses that we described and we think about how can we implement these in our coaching meetings, if you will. I've had several clients that took the 3 types of proposals and literally put it in their CRM next to each proposal, or into some type of documentation. So it mandated that the salesperson identify which one they thought they were in. Now they didn't have to be, they weren't always right necessarily, but they're at least they're thinking about it. Again, it's that awareness thing. And then when the sales manager is sitting down reviewing the opportunities, very first question should be, what's the pain? What's the reason they want to buy from us? Because you said it earlier, no pain, no sale. So let's figure out what that is. If we don't have that, we know the likelihood of winning that piece of business is pretty low. So we either have to go get it through coaching our salespeople, or help them take it to a no, which is another one of the lenses. You know, another discipline or technique is that series of non-negotiable questions we talked about, which is one of those lenses. You know, as a company, sit down, come up with the 2 to 3 questions that you say mandatory. You know, it makes it more black and white. And then on the back end with the last 2 lenses, you know, asking the salesperson, what's your next step? And I like to say, if my next step from a salesperson starts with the word I, that's a problem. In other words, I have to follow up next Friday versus we have a date and time on the calendar at 2:00 on Friday to talk. So we want those to start with we. And then if they don't have a clear future, now, is this something we ought to think about taking to a no? And I think the sales manager has to have the discipline to say it's okay to the salesperson to take that to a no. Let's learn a lesson, but clearly they're not getting back to you. So let's not hang on with that one.
Love it. All right. Now I want to get to know you a little bit better. Ken, you've been on the podcast before, so people can check earlier episodes and stuff. 2 of our favorite cheesy job interview questions here. But you have had some life changes, and you're getting into different stages and stuff here. So I want to ask you what your current definition of success is.
Well, current definition of success on the personal side is helping make this transition. Our oldest, I shared with you, our oldest is about to go off to college. And so how do we successfully transition? Now, I do still have a 7th grader, but so I'll have another 4.5 years with her before we're empty nesters. But how do we successfully transition out of having only one child in the home? And that's going to be, I mean, we've already had a lot of emotion behind it, and we're excited for him, but at the same time, you know, it's a big life change for us. And then on the professional side, the definition of success, certainly with our franchise, is we've added another location in Jacksonville, Florida. We really want to grow that one, and hopefully allow us to maybe spend a little more time in the winter down there as well. So definition of success is certainly to watch our team grow, watch that location in particular grow. But I think that one of the biggest things for me is we here are pretty relentless that we don't ever want anyone, our clients, to feel like we want the investment with us to feel like an ant for the return they're getting. So we have a relentless desire to make sure that that's always the case. And if we need to blow the relationship up, if it's not the case, because we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing, we have to have the courage to do it.
Yeah, I like that a lot. All right. Now I just want to ask you about a favorite Sandler concept here. I forget the one you shared last time. If you have a favorite Sandler concept for yourself or one for pipeline management, what comes to mind?
Well, I do have a favorite rule that I haven't shared before, but one of my favorite old time rules is number 36 that says only decision makers get others to make decisions. I think that's super powerful in pipeline management because it's a whole lot easier to get a decision when we're talking to the right person and not afraid. And what I see with salespeople for the most part is they're afraid to call high enough in the organization because they think they don't belong at that seat at the table. And I think that's a mistake. So any way we can leverage that and not be afraid to call the right person, we need to do that.
I think that's great stuff. And I'll just add on to that. One that my dad, who's a Sandler trainer, taught me is that the way we buy and the way we make decisions can influence the way that we sell. Mm-hmm. And I don't think people realize that if you like to shop around, if you get 3 quotes, when your buyers say, I need to get 3 quotes, you go, yep, I agree. You definitely should. Inside and even some subtly, or sometimes not subtly. You tell them, I'm sure you need to go get 3 more quotes. So I'll come back here in a couple of months and you're shooting yourself in the foot. So decision makers who can make quick decisions, who expect other people to make decisions and can help people make great decisions, usually get that back in return from the buyers. That's a big, powerful concept. All right. Thank you so much for being on the show, Ken. Ken is a longtime Sandler trainer in Akron, Ohio there. And you can find all of our locations at Sandler.com. You can click on find a training location, find one near you, or reach out to the enterprise team if you are looking for multi-location training as well, or even international. I think 27 different languages now or something like that. But Sandler is the worldwide leader in sales management and customer service training. You can find our free resources, subscribe to this podcast, and join one of our live events, the Sandler Summit in Orlando, or check out the recordings from this year's virtual summit at the resources tab on Sandler.com as well. Until next time, whatever you are, be a good one. That's what I always